One helpful way to think about a species' role in the environment is asking what its niche is. The ecological niche, what its role is in a particular community. So what are the abiotic things that are important? What's too cold, what's too hot, what's the range that it tolerates for all sorts of things, too dry, too wet. And biotic, what other types of organisms does it need, what others affect it? And so we think about the habitat, all the different things influencing one particular species. Now, where an organism might like to live and where it actually is able to may be somewhat different. Competition, for example, can change that. This is our native and all here in the eastern US, a fairly common type of lizard. We can find them around here. They're able to change their color between green and brown, so you may see either color. This one, conspicuously, is on a leaf. Now around here, you do see them on leaves and plants, and running around on the ground. Florida now, besides those native ones, has a number of invasive species from parts of the Caribbean. There are quite a few types of anole lizards on different Caribbean islands. And this one in particular is from Cuba. It is bigger than the native one, doesn't turn green, and it has this extra pattern rather than being basically uniform green or brown on the back. What's this one on? Looks like a rock. It is on the ground. Where we have these guys running around on the ground, the native ones are generally staying up in the branches. They aren't able to compete with the bigger guys for the bugs and other tasty things found down on the ground and have to stay out of the way of them. So the niche for the native anole is smaller due to the competition with the invasive brown anole in this case. For any particular species, there are likely to be various limiting resources. Obvious extremes. Humans, we need to have a certain amount of water and food, and temperatures not too extreme. We can't live, say, without special shelter in the middle of Antarctica. There's not enough food, it's too cold. So there are going to be various limits. So if there's too much or too little of things, particular species won't be able to manage, or maybe not quite to that point, but they're going to be less common if the relative amounts of whatever resources are important are not ideal. So, for example, a particular type of plant needs a certain amount of water. If you have houseplants and don't water them, eventually they do die. Even in your yard, if you have something that likes more water or less water than is happening, then plants aren't going to do well. Mineral content of soils. Some soils can have very good proportions of minerals, lots of plants like it, but they're going to be too little or too much of certain things for some species to tolerate. An example of this becoming a problem in places where irrigation is used to provide water to soils. Adding that extra water in to a dry part of the world, that tends to first dissolve various salts from the ground, and then whatever water isn't taken up by the plant evaporates and deposits that salt. So over time, irrigation in a dry area tends to make the ground more salty, eventually reaching the point where the plants do not grow well, or maybe even die and can't grow there. Competitive exclusion. This is the idea that two species can't have the exact same niche. Eventually, one is going to outcompete the other, and the one that's outcompeted will die out. You do see this happening in lab if we have direct competition in a small area. A classic type of study for this, two types of beetle, closely related species, both of which like to eat flour, as in what you make bread from. So it's pretty easy to raise them. If you have a small, say, aquarium with the beetles in there and provide some flour and other sorts of things there, over time, if you leave it long enough, you'll be left with just one type of beetle. It turns out, depends, say if it was a little more humid, one of them does better, if a little drier, the other does better, that type of thing. Out there in the real world, you hardly ever see that situation. Okay, we've got patches of grass with their seeds, but the beetles will be eating in the wild instead of flour. Okay, but this end of the field's a little damper, this end of the field's a little drier, and the two types of beetles are each doing okay in their own part of the field, and neither one's totally wiped out because there's differences out there in nature. So this is a situation, now in the general idea, okay, yeah, we're not like to have two species doing exactly the same thing, but there are so many different features of the world. Each one can kind of find its own particular niche, and totally identical niches rarely happen. If direct competition is the main limiting factor, okay, that's when you tend to see this. Another complication is, what if we've got some density dependent factors that kick in? One species starts to get more common, it's outcompeting the other, and as it gets real common, all of a sudden it's having all these problems due to the higher density. Remember, we talked about things such as disease tends to be a bigger problem when you've got more individuals together in close space because it spreads easy. That's all our social distancing idea there. Predators will tend to focus on something if there's more of it. We have a variety of density-dependent factors that tend to kick in that may push that competitor down, and other things have a chance as well. But another thing, rather than trying to compete, is to share, divide up the resources. And so over time, natural selection will tend to favor different species specializing in different areas. This is an example of some different species of warblers. These are small birds. They're migrating through our area now. These particular species are ones that nest and spend their summers up in the taiga, the conifer forest in northernmost U.S. across Canada. So they're all living in the same area, feeding on insects, living on the spruce and fir trees and the like. Okay, how can we have lots of similar small birds doing pretty much the same thing? Well, different species, as this picture illustrates, are focused on different parts of the tree. And also, even within that, you have variation. Do you hang out at the tips of the branches looking for those bugs out there? Do you crawl deeper into the tree, focusing on there? There are different types of hiding places that insects could have, and by focusing in on different parts, each one has its own place to focus on, and they're all able to coexist. This is resource partitioning, dividing up the resource so that everybody gets some and you're not directly competing. Other ways, timing, location, different places to nest, whatever different factors that there might be competition for. If there's a way of dividing it up, you get options. Of course, also it depends how limiting is the resource. If there's loads of it, like our bumper crop of acorns, well, there's not much competition because there's more acorns than anybody can eat. But when there is more competition, dividing it up, that's one way everything is able to manage. A different sort of division is character displacement, where the features of the organism itself change in response to the type of competition. If we have two species that are somewhat similar to each other, where they live and overlap, they tend to be more different from each other than where only one is found. This particular example comes from Galapagos finches, but there are many others. And so where the two are both found, there's less competition because they're more different from each other. Where there's just one, well, you don't have to worry about competition. You can be more general. So here's the example, measuring the size of the beak. A bigger, more massive, pointy beak like that is going to be good for cracking into harder seeds. Where the two species live on the same part of the same island, this one here has noticeably bigger beaks than this one. On places where only one of them is found, the beak size tends to be more in the middle. Yeah, they're tending a little smaller here, a little bigger there, but a lot of overlap because, well, there's no competition, so they might as well try to eat all the seeds. But where there is competition, this one specializing on the smaller seeds, that one on the bigger ones. And so by the character displacement, the difference in particular feature, beak size in this case, they're able to do different things. Interactions can have other effects, such as coevolution, where two species affecting each other tend to evolve in a direction together. For example, predation. One species, the predator, is eating the prey. A carnivore, what we usually think of for predators, eating other animals. Herbivores eating plants. Well, to the plant, that's a predator. So we have that categorization. Okay, your predator has to find a way to get the prey. The prey doesn't want to be eaten. So it's got to find ways around whatever defenses the prey has. Conversely, the prey is going to try to come up with defenses. Now, of course, I can't think, okay, I want a defense, I'm going to mutate this way, but those that happen to have a mutation that provides a defense are going to have an advantage, or predators having a mutation that happens to enable them to be a better predator have the advantage. And there are lots of different particular strategies that may help. And so this can lead to sort of the arms race. Okay, predator has found a way to attack these prey. Prey evolves defenses against that predator. And so you've got the continually building. Now, of course, complication. What's the cost of these new features? If they get too costly, you may have a problem there eventually. So, for example, when you have major extinction, in some cases, things that have had more massive defensive seem to die off more. Perhaps all the energy put into defense left them with less energy to manage to survive in the extinction. Looking at, say, fossil shells, really massive shells, those seem to die off more, perhaps because so much energy went into making that. On the other hand, there's some that apparently don't cost much to do. So, say algae, making chemicals to try to make themselves taste bad to all the grazing animals around, well, it can help, but it depends on their taste. For example, not algae, a true plant, chili peppers make capsaicin to try to discourage animals from eating their seeds. Certain humans have developed a liking for that taste and actively seek to eat them. So this sort of pattern is seen in algae as well. Different places, different levels of pressure. So say seaweed, that if it were growing around here, our seaweed eaters would take a taste and bleh, I'm not eating that one. Same stuff growing on a tropical reef might be gobbled up. You see much higher levels of these nasty chemicals, and the grazing animals are used to it and don't care. But apparently it doesn't hurt the algae to make the chemicals, so it's still making them, but it's not helping them very much. But you can have coevolution for things cooperating as well. For example, pollinators. A flower that can build itself so that one particular type of pollinator can pollinate it and not other things, can focus the resources on that pollinator. In turn, that pollinator specializes in those flowers. The pollinator gets what it likes because the flower is specializing for it. And that pollinator focusing on those flowers means pollen is more likely to get to the right type of other flower. As opposed to, say, some bee that's just kind of randomly going to whatever flower it sees next. That's going to not be as effective a way of getting pollen to a specific target. And also, whatever flower, well, probably not all that specialized in what the bee likes. But in cases where you've got this specialization, the two go along. For example, hummingbirds getting extra long bills, maybe even a funny curve, things like that. Just the right shape for a particular flower. That flower's giving the nectar pollen that the hummingbird likes, and the hummingbird is focused on those flowers, pollinating those in particular.